her daughter was in an accident and is going to be okay, but it's a serious accident. So we have with us today Kelly Stuck, who handles, is the Associate Vice President, I guess that right? And you handle benefits, you work with benefits for the university system. So Kelly, would you substitute for Betsy?
Be happy to. Thank you for having me here today. Next slide, please. Oh, that'd be great. Which one? Here. Okay, thank you. Today, as Betsy shared with you at the last meeting, our goal is over this series of meetings to be able to update you on the material that's going to be presented and keep you up to date, so by the time you reach the October board meeting, you feel fully prepared for the decisions that we would ask you to make on that date. So today we're going to cover the finalized combination plan design and cost structure. I'll talk to you about the selection process for the defined contribution plan. Also, you had mentioned risk mitigation strategies, which are those things that make sure we minimize the investment risk for employees, and we'll talk about those. Then in October, we'll give you an update on the selection process for the defined contribution plan. We also want to talk about the plan expenses and the plan investment process. We're spending work and time on that already, but there's information that we won't have available until that October meeting around that. And then on October 20th, we would expect or hope to bring as an action item the approval of the plan for the new retirement plan. This is a slide that you have seen several times over, and what I'm bringing to you today is recommended by the Retirement and Staff Benefits Committee. So 2 days in July, they had a work session in which they finalized both the plan design and the risk mitigation strategies. So this comes to you as a recommendation from that committee. The changes since the last time that you saw this, focusing on the middle column that has the combination plan design, is that when you saw it before, it was 1.1% of pay, but as the committee looked at the total cost of the plan, they felt like they needed to alter a few of the benefits because the total cost of the plan was considerably higher. They were up to around 8.5% as opposed to 7.25, which is currently what we invest in the retirement plan. So the 1.1 calculation changed to 1.0. Under the contribution, which is your second dark blue line down in the middle, 3.21% of salary. Because of the different multiplier rate moving from 1.1 to 1.0, that then consequently reduces the contribution to an average of 3.21 contribution. Employee mandatory contribution, this is a change as well. When you saw this previously, we had the employee contribution on the defined contribution side, not on the defined benefit side, and there were a number of reasons for that. But the committee came to the conclusion that both in terms of funding the most expensive portion of the plan, which is the defined benefit portion, in mitigating risk for the university, which is part of the responsibility that they saw as theirs, and in ensuring that the employee has a guaranteed retirement benefit through the defined benefit portion of the plan and putting as much savings into that side of the plan as they could. They actually elected to move the employee contribution from the DC portion of the plan to the defined benefit portion of the plan. The other change...
Yes.
Did you have a question?
Who is on the committee that made these new decisions that you're pointing out?
Okay, so the work of the advisory committee, which was the specially appointed committee on November the 1st, went to the Retirement Staff Benefits Committee, which is a longstanding committee under the collected rules, and it has staff representatives and faculty representatives on that community and on that committee. And they typically are the ones who hear appeals, monitor the implementation of the benefit plan, and make recommendations to the board regarding that plan.
All four campuses are representative?
Yes.
Represented in each of those categories, faculty,
yes.
Staff?
Mm-hmm. Correct. Right. And all campuses were represented in this decision. Okay? The other discussion or decision that they made around the contribution was for kind of purposes of making it simple, when the advisory committee was doing the draft plan, they had the employee contribution at 1%, just to make it easier, and the Retirement Staff Benefits Committee recommends that they have the same contribution level, particularly since it's going into the DB plan that is currently on the DB plan now. So you'll see that those two contributions match exactly between the new recommended plan and the current plan. There will be no minimum value accumulation in the new plan, and that's because you have a portable defined contribution portion that you can take with you, so it functions effectively like the MVA does in the current plan. And for the DC portion, these have not changed, and so UM will continue to put a 2% of pay-in, match 100% up to a 3% employee contribution, and the vesting period would be 3 years. Now, one of the things they did struggle with was the vesting period, and you'll notice we put a notation that says not cumulative there, and that's the reason because we do have people who go on and off benefit eligibility. And so if you required it to be consecutive, and a lot of these people are people that may go to a VA appointment and then come back, or have situations like that that really are beneficial to the university for them to be able to do that, and we don't want to penalize them for that. If you made it cumulative and somebody had to do a continuous 3 years, or continuous rather than cumulative, then, you know, if they went on and off, they might effectively never be vested in the DC plan. And so the committee's recommending that it not have to be consecutive, that
So
it be
it really
cumulative.
should say not consecutive.
Yeah.
It should say that. Thank
Yeah,
you.
I mean, you
Yes.
want it to be cumulative.
Yes, it should be cumulative and not consecutive. Thank you. We'll correct that. Okay?
So, just to understand that, if there's a person that works for a year, leaves for a year, comes back for a year, or comes back for 2 years, then the contributions that were essentially forfeited after the first year, they would be entitled to them?
No, they would not. If they leave and take their money, because you don't get the
What if they
university.
leave their money?
In the DC plan, we're still making decisions about if it's under a certain amount, if that money would roll out automatically, if it would cash out automatically. So some of those decisions about what happens depending on the amount. But you are correct in that an employee could leave and come back and leave and come back. And if once they hit 3 years cumulative service, they would be qualified or vested under the DC plan.
But, Kelly, I think the question is, if that would be true unless they take the money, their contributions, cash that out at the time of their original deposit.
What they're going to,
They
yeah,
wouldn't get credit for that earlier time.
they would get service credit for the earlier time, but they would not get the money. Yeah. So I think that's the distinction probably maybe that I wasn't making clear. So there's a distinction now between who keeps the money and the service credit. So if you leave, then you don't get that money saved up. In other words, we don't save that money in your account because it's a defined contribution plan. So when you terminate, that money leaves.
If you leave, are you allowed to keep the funds, leave the funds?
You can keep your funds, but in terms of what happens, there's still some termination. I'm going to share some of them with you today, but there's still some termination decisions that we're making. And that has not been voted on by the committee yet in terms of where they stand on that one.
And are all these qualifications about full-time employees? Or are they about adjunct faculty? Are they
The requirement,
part-time?
yeah, the requirement to be benefit eligible is 75%.
75% of their
Mm-hmm.
time.
I don't think that John's got his question
I'm
answered
sorry.
yet.
No, I
No, and I'm not sure I can.
understood it, they haven't decided yet.
Yeah,
Is that the-
well, I need to take that back, and I made a note. We definitely will address that in the next presentation. I am going to share some termination discussions, but the committee's not voted on those yet, and that's one that is still outstanding.
But-
So we'll have to bring that
To
back.
make it easy, though, to the extent the employee puts money into the DC, that's the employee's money,
Right.
and it's portable.
I understand that, but my question is, the employee works for a year and then leaves and then comes back, then, and stays an additional 2 years and 13 months, or 1 year and 13 months, 2 years and a month. Then do they get the match that the university made before,
In the first group.
the first group?
I think there would be a forfeiture that would apply to that first contribution. They wouldn't get that. And then once they were vested, then they'd get the contributions made, but the forfeiture would apply when they left the first time.
But does it have to be then? I mean, one of the questions that I had was, if I worked for the university for a year and then said, I'm going to go someplace else, go to school or something like that, and then I come back, do I have to take my money when I leave? Or can I leave it and then when I come back, work towards the rest of my vesting?
Well, you wouldn't forfeit your voluntary contributions, but the employer's contribution would be a forfeiture. And I don't, I mean, that would be money that would stay behind and would reduce our cost for contributions for other people. And so, are you saying I want that suspended for some period of time before it's treated as a forfeiture?
I think if they leave their money and don't draw it out, then I think if they come back, then they should get the vesting.
So if you don't demand a withdrawal of the voluntary contribution, your potential forfeiture is suspended for some period of time before it's treated as an actual forfeiture. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
How about that, Betsy?
Well, traditionally, preserving money is kind of a DB, defined benefit style of plan thinking. In a defined contribution plan, typically if you terminate coverage or terminate employment, you forfeit those dollars. Now, your dollars are your dollars, but until you vest, now once you vest, so I think in the committee's discussion, they were feeling like they were being liberal and accommodating by not requiring people to have consecutive time, but allowing them to have cumulative time. But one of the things we'll discuss, and this is on in it, we discussed if you return and leave before and after the new plan comes into effect, and we also discussed whether vesting had to be cumulative or consecutive. We did not, though, get into the level of depth that you are talking about. So we didn't get to that next level, and there is more to discuss. So I've made a note on that, and I will discuss that with the committee.
It seems to me if you can accumulate the years, you ought to be able to accumulate contributions, either by leaving yours there and you know you're coming back, or some plans you can buy back in, and if you buy back your share, then the employer's share, matches that going forward. But if the intent is to allow people to count that year, then it should count fully, including the funds they put in and the funds
The
that
match.
university puts in.
Well, administratively, you're going to have to put some kind of window, though, or that's just going to become a nightmare. That you got to return within 5 years or some
Yeah.
period of time.
That may be, or if they take it out, come back, and this is common with a lot of plans, you put it back in and buy in what you had,
Yeah.
and then what the employer put in goes with it. But
That'd
some
be-
way that it's, that,
That'd be an option.
yeah. If you count the years, you ought to be able to fully count for the money.
Well, and some of those are trade-offs, and when we get to risk mitigation, I will tell you that the committee leaned toward more traditional defined contribution elements in some parts of the plan, and I'll talk about those with the strategies, and in others, they were a little more conservative. So, it's a trade-off when they're kind of discussing the whole piece, and they're really trying to focus on the defined benefit portion as the constant, secure savings vehicle, and leave the defined contribution under employee control, if you will. And if they decide to come or leave or whatever, that's up to them. That's their money. So that's kind of their thinking. But I did make a note of that. I will be sure that the committee addresses it, and we'll do that. While we're on this topic, though, I thought I would go ahead and go over the slide about reemployment considerations. This is quite a detailed level, but it is important to the committee and I think to you all as well. So the first four categories, if you look at the lines on the table, are if you leave before 2012 and return after 2012, because we have a number of people, who come and go in the university. And so if you're vested or non-vested, and this is mostly around service credit, okay? So if you look at the first one, if you're vested and you don't cash out, so this is around, DB plan, you're going to go, and which plan you come back into, you're going to go into tier 1 with service credit, or basically the current plan. So in other words, if a vested employee leaves and they leave their money with the university and they come back at some point to work for the university, we're going to put them back in the current plan and we're going to give them service credit just like we would currently under the plan. So that doesn't change. If you leave before 2012, return after, you're vested, but you cash out, currently under the plan, you lose your service credit, and you would do the same thing as what the committee is recommending in this instance. But when you come back in, because you now have no service credit in the old plan, they would put you in the new combination plan. Third line would be you're not vested and you don't cash out. We would still bring you back into the new plan because you weren't vested in the current plan, but we would give you service credit for the time that you had worked previously. Fourth one, you're not vested, you don't cash out. Oh, that's the third one, sorry. You leave before, you're not vested, and you do cash out, then you'd go into tier 2. And again, anytime you cash out, you don't come back with service credit because you're forfeiting that benefit rate basically when you do it. So that's a recommendation around that group. Then you have the group that, what if people leave after 2012? Because then you've got the new plan into effect. How would you treat them? And it's a lot along the same lines, except most people go into the new plan at that point. If you are vested and you cash out, again, go back into the new, or you'll go into the new plan, no service credit because you forfeited that. If you're vested and you don't cash out, that really is the only time when you come back in and you get service credit. So the way that the committee's recommending is that if people are vested when they leave and they leave their money with UM in the defined benefit plan, that they would come back into the plan that they were at before. They felt like that's the most generous in terms of when former President Forsey said there will be no change to current plans. To the current plan or to current employees, they interpreted that rather literally, and I think that's where that's coming from, that recommendation. If you cash out or you're not vested, typically you're going to go back into the new plan. Questions about that? And like I said, there's that whole next level that we were addressing earlier that we've still got to get to, but it took us a good day to get through this part.
Under the tier 1 plan now, can you buy service?
No, we don't allow you to purchase service in any of our plans currently. Okay, so I'm going to go back to where we were. Any questions, any more questions on the plan design before I go on?
Let me ask you this about the total estimated contribution. We're talking about going from 7.25% to possibly 7.7%. What's that in terms of dollars?
I can't tell you the dollars off the top of my head. It's a $2.7 billion plan, but I can't tell you the dollars off the top of my head. I will tell you some assumptions underlying that. We have to do a sensitivity analysis because the wild card is how much will we match? Will we match the full 3% and how will people contribute, okay? So that's where your cost goes from 7.4 to 7.7 is how much do you think people will contribute? And because when we get to risk mitigation, one of the committee's recommendations is that we opt people into the plan at the highest contribution level, which is 3%, and then they can opt to go lower if they want to go lower. So because we're going to opt them in and inertia strikes and most people don't make changes once they're in a certain situation, so the committee was conservative in estimating that there would be a higher level of participation because of that feature. They're estimating that anyone who makes more than $50,000 a year would get the full match. They would contribute 3% and get the full match. They estimated that anybody in the $25,000 to $50,000 would probably contribute on average 2% and get a 2% match. They estimated that people under $25,000 in income in general would do 1% and get a 1% match. So underlying these assumptions is that sensitivity analysis and their assumptions. And I would say that they're fairly conservative, meaning that if anything, this is on the high end in terms of it will probably be closer to the 7.4 than the 7.7.
So we are looking at going up on a cost.
You are looking up in cost. And I think the committee's thought process behind that was there's a statement in the board resolution for their work that indicates that the board might be willing to consider a somewhat higher cost in exchange for risk mitigation, and they look at, or long-term cost fluctuation, and they look at adding the DC portion and minimizing the DB portion as mitigating some risk to the university.
But I think the board ought to be informed of how many dollars we're talking about.
Okay.
You know, so we can make that decision with full transparency there.
Okay.
You know, I'm sure Nikki would be quick to point out, maybe I'm presumptive, but quick to point out that the comparison is not necessarily 7.25 to 7.4. The comparison is really 7.4 to what it would be if we did nothing. And, you know, I'd like to know that that has a cost too. If we do nothing, that has potentially a very draconian cost.
Yeah, so
Above
the-
7.25.
Right, well, the 7.25 is the normal cost over the life of the plan. And so at any point in time, that cost can go, it has gone, at least over the past 10 years, to as low as 2.35% to, we're projecting that depending on what happens in the markets, but we were projecting it could go as high as 13-14%.
That's the
April.
comparison that I'm,
That's the risk.
Yeah. So
the
this-
risk
Taking down.
There would still be some variation because that's the total combined cost of both the DC and the DB. So the DB would still have that variation, but not as much variation because it's a smaller percentage. But you would have the piece on the DC plan, which would be stable.
Weren't we estimating that an increase in the university's contribution of 1% during the down market would add about another $10 million?
Yes, that's true.
That's correct.
So every percentage point of our contribution, one way or the other, is about $10 million.
So if we increase the contribution from 7.25 to 7.4, that's $15 million we're talking about.
No.
No,
1.5.
1%.
1.5, so what would it be?
So we're talking about increasing it 15 basis points as opposed to 100 basis points.
0.5, yeah.
So you're talking
So
about
1.5
15%
million?
of the,
Yeah, 1.5
of the 10.
million.
Yeah, so you're talking about 1.5 million.
the point I want to illustrate with that is that what you're really doing here, you may be paying a little bit more, but you're buying down your total risk,
Over
You're cutting your
time.
risk in half.
cutting your risk in half.
You're minimizing the volatility.
Right,
Right.
But the cost is, on average, going to be higher.
right. You're paying to lower volatility risk.
Well,
The other thing is-
in a bad market, theoretically, our costs would not be higher.
In a good market, it will be a lot higher. So, on average, it's going to be 7.25.
On average, it's going to be 7.25.
In a good
But
market.
if we have a bad market, and therefore,
I'm sorry, you're right. Why would it be good?
We're having to cover the actuarial deficit, we're having to increase, and that risk is much bigger than 7.4.
But on average, it'll be 7.25 is our best estimate.
Right,
right?
which is 30.
For the DB side of the plan.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, cool.
Okay. One of the things the committee struggled with was retirement adequacy, and how would an employee of 35 years be at the end, at the time they retired at age 65. So this graph illustrates that. The line on the bottom with the little open circles represents if an employee was in the plan for 35 years with an estimated return or average return over that 35 years of 6% in the defined contribution plan, and only made the minimum contribution, so only the 1 or 2%. They didn't get any of the match. How would they turn out at retirement? So you can see when they're younger, up to about age 54, which we know is when the DB plan accelerates, they don't do, they kind of keep pretty close to where the current DB plan is, but they fall off in later years of retirement if they're not actively contributing and receiving the match from the university. The black line is the current defined benefit plan, and the dark blue line that has the circles filled in and goes up to the top, that is if an employee contributed the maximum amount, or 3%, and received the 3% match from the university under the DC portion. If you combine both the DB and DC, how would they be at retirement after 35 years? And that's the top line. So again, assuming a 6% average return over the course of 35 years, they would be slightly better off than they would be in the current DB plan according to this. Okay, so we realize there are estimates and assumptions under this, but it was the best illustration the committee felt of retirement adequacy and trying to determine how the plans provided for future employees.
The top line, though, it assumes every employee maxes out. Is that what you said?
It assumes that an employee who's here 35 years, from 30 to 65, and contributes 3% and gets the 3% match. So it doesn't, nothing over that, but they maximize everything they can in terms of a match or university contribution.
But we're projecting that employees between 25,000 and 50,000 would contribute on average 2%, right?
Correct, on average. Mhm.
Well, that's why you're defaulting people into the more generous default option, because you want to get them to do
Oh,
that.
absolutely. I mean,
You
that's-
clearly want to get them to do
But
that.
if they don't.
If
my-
they don't.
My guess is that the top line will be lower than the current. I mean, it's a guess. I don't, you may
Well,
not
no,
have
it
that.
makes, no, you're right. I mean,
Yeah.
it makes sense, because this is assuming that they get the 3%
Right.
match. And the committee spent a lot of time talking about personal responsibility versus university, and,
Right.
they really struggled with this.
We've
This
had
was
those
difficult.
debates.
Yep, this was difficult.
And actually, that top line could be even higher if they contributed more.
Yes. But I will say, in all fairness to the committee, that if you contribute tax-free to other tax-deferred plans, so could your DB savings. So both, depending on individual
Right.
behavior and how much you maximize your options,
Because
could be higher.
you can contribute more and be tax-free at such and such age there,
Yes,
and you could have that higher.
yes, we have lots of opportunities for that.
Yes.
Any more questions on this?
When you move the 1% employee mandate, or 1% employee mandatory contribution from the DB plan to the DC plan, then you raise the number of people that will not get any of the match.
I'm not sure I follow. When you
Okay,
move,
the required, the employees now have to pay 1%.
correct.
As I recall, previously, that 1% was put into the DC portion.
Correct, uh-huh.
By moving that to the DB portion, that reduces the amount the university will match.
No, it did not. Under the DC side, we actually are matching, we were recommending 3%, and we still are.
Well, but if they were required to put in 1%, then we were going to match that 1%?
No, the 1% went in as, along with the UM 2% as kind of a base, and then we only had a 3% match. So the 3% match was in addition to the 1%, regardless of which part of the plan it's in.
Okay.
Okay, so just under the vendor selection process, basically, we received a request for qualifications. We've evaluated those, and I have the results. We have selected 6 qualifying vendors. The RFP was supposed to go out today, but it's got a little snag in review, and so it'll probably be about the middle of the week, but we're pretty close to our target. Responses are due, and we may again push this back a couple of days depending on the release, but around September the 7th. Finalist interviews, we expect to choose 2 or 3 finalists, and those interviews will be held the 24th and 25th. And then we expect to select a vendor shortly thereafter and begin implementation on November the 1st. This is the list of organizations that we directly sent the RFQ to. And the reason were either these are vendors that had contacted us and were interested, that were either a current incumbent, which is illustrated with the asterisk beside the name, or who were recommended by one of the consultants that we were using to help us with the process. The RFP was also posted, or RFQ, on the website for the university for procurement, so it was a public process and anyone was invited to participate. Those in blue are the ones who responded to the request for qualifications. I will tell you the reason some of them did not is that there are absolutely no assets at this time in the defined contribution plan, and the assets in the, even if we combine the 2 processes and use a single vendor for both our tax deferred plans and the DC plan, if we were to choose to do that, you could still expect that maybe only a quarter of people would move money from their current vendor to the new vendor. And so while it would help us in the future, there's not an advantage here. So if you're a vendor looking at this, you're thinking, there might be a couple $100 million that I might get advantage of. And I know this plan will grow over time, but I'm going to wait 5 years until it's a bigger plan, and I'll bid on it when they go back out to bid the next time. And so there are just some vendors out there who only, bid on plans that are of a certain size. So here was the RFQ scoring criteria, and we were really trying to get to kind of the nuts and bolts of what a vendor could offer. And so the scoring criteria for the RFP will be a little bit different than it is here, but this was kind of clear people out that weren't going to be able to offer the services. So you can see we were looking at fees, gross and net fees, the size of the firm. Local presence in UM sites was more important, not as much where the corporate office was located, but that they have people on the ground at our various sites that could work with our folks around education. We wanted experience within higher education and organizations of our size. Fee transparency was critical. Compatibility with outside investment consultants. One of the things we hear from employees is, I use a current independent consultant. Can I continue to do that, and will I be able to work through the plan with that independent consultant? And so that was one of the things that we asked. Very strong communication. We believe our people need both high touch and high tech. Experience with different plan types. For example, we may have found a vendor that had a lot of experience with 403B, but no experience with 401A. And so we tried to get a broad experience of plan types. And then a broad range of low expense investment choices. For the scoring process, Siegel, who is our investment advisor, as well as Torin Consulting, who is running the RFP process, graded them, and then they were reviewed by staff and then by the selection committee, and that's how we came to our conclusion. So these are the 6 vendors that we currently are planning to release the RFP to. Diversified Investment Advisors, Fidelity Investments, Great West, ING, Tia Craft, and Valak. Our timeline is we're in the process of notifying those who will not be receiving the RFP now. And you can see, again, the dates that we go through on that slide. Risk mitigation strategies. These were the things that I think the board and I know the committee was concerned about in terms of how are we going to minimize the risk. I already mentioned the auto enrollment, so automatically enrolling new employees at 3%, although they can opt to a lower amount. Investment control. Now, this is one of those trade-offs that I told you. The committee spent a lot of time talking about, because our vesting period is of 3 years, is longer than most defined contribution plans, do we let employees control the money during that time, or does UM control the UM contributions and the employees only able to control their contributions? And the committee's recommendation is that the employee has full control over all DC investments. The reason for this recommendation is that they felt like if the employee was taking on some of the risk of retirement and contributing and had more of a responsibility, that they should also have more control. And that was kind of where they landed on that one. But that was a long discussion.
On that point, I understand that the employee would have control over the consolidated contribution, but I presume that the options that they have full control over, I mean, there's a range of options from, very aggressive to very, very safe.
Correct.
And that there's some ability, depending on the age of the participant, to move those who should be in the more safe category. We can't tell them what to do, but what we can at least steer them towards an age-appropriate level of risk.
We can provide education, communication, that's our responsibility, but it's a loss of control, if you will.
Right.
I mean, it is giving control to the employee, although we do have a fiduciary responsibility.
How many different investment options do you anticipate the employee would have in control?
We're going to spend a lot of time on that next month, and we're still exploring that. We would expect to have, right now, we're looking at somewhere between 21 and 25 asset classes. And then we will have funds within that. And because we're asking the vendors to bring their best-in-class lineup in each of those asset classes, we haven't made a decision yet on what the
That's
funds
quite a
will be.
bit. When you put that matrix down, that's quite a bit of choice. I think that's where we all have said we really want to help employees get the right investment mix for their age.
There will be recommendations, though, for depending on your age, what asset classes you
Yes.
belong in.
Yes.
And, yeah.
As well as the majority, usually somewhere between 50 and 70% of employees will participate in what's called a life cycle fund, which is an age-appropriate, retirement date-appropriate fund. And that will be our, well, if you look up here, you see default to life cycle fund. So again, inertia, fighting inertia. If an employee does not decide, so they've maybe put or opted in at 3%, but they never decide where to put their money, we would opt them into a life cycle fund. So they would default to that. So that would be your age-appropriate, retirement date-appropriate fund. So we know that just based on statistics, most employees will end up there, but there will be some. I mean, if a few employees wanted to, take a gamble and play, I mean, you do have to decide where the control lies. Any other questions on that? Okay. Auto rebalancing, they wanted to offer as an option. This would be, I pick my investment portfolio and what percentages I want to put in different asset classes. So they want to offer that as an option, but not require that. Loan availability, they were leaning on the side of eliminating loans in the DC portion and not allowing them. However, looking at the information, 95% of plans or greater allow loans. And so now they are looking at, from a competitive standpoint, perhaps allowing loans, but limiting the number of loans that people can have to perhaps one at a time or something like that. We do have individuals with a number of loans on a single account. So. Hardship
On the loans only after they're vested, after 3 years. Is that right? Or
I'm sorry?
Would they be eligible for loans immediately or only after they're vested?
After vesting.
After
Yes,
vesting,
correct,
3
after
years.
vesting.
Right.
Is there any legal reason that we can prohibit loans?
Well, as a plan sponsor, we can decide not to allow loans. But because we will probably use one of our current vehicles, investment funds like either the 403B or 457, we currently allow some loans in those plans. So that means if we use an existing plan, we have to change it for everybody, both existing employees and future employees. And you've got the competitiveness issue. So those were the two things that the committee struggled with.
Being competitive with other institutions?
So where their discussion ended was that they were leaning toward allowing them, although they want to go back and revisit, but minimizing it to maybe one loan at a time.
The maximum though is still $50,000.
Yes. Well, actually, it's 50% of your balance. I'm sorry, let me correct that.
Well, it's the lesser of 50,000 or 50% of the balance.
Right.
That's the balance. But,
Right.
So I mean, what would the board think about limiting loans to hardship situations instead of just, because I mean, it's a pretty significant burden then on the administrative staff to process those loans?
Well, yeah, hardship is not, they don't repay it. There's not a repayment schedule or requirement because by IRS definition, the expectation is an employee's in a situation where they couldn't or would have a difficulty repaying it. And so they did vote to allow hardship withdrawals, but loans was where they kind of were struggling.
Well, a key purpose of today's discussion is to get feedback from this board. And, my feedback would be, I think we should make the loan provision as difficult to achieve as possible, and if elected, as limited as possible.
I mean, when I say hardship, I guess I mean that you could only borrow for certain defined purposes that would be relatively rare and would be the kind of thing that you'd be sympathetic to somebody and allowing that loan as opposed to letting somebody borrow just, for example, to invest in the stock market or buy a car or something like that. That'd be.
I would agree with that.
Let me ask this, when a person makes a loan, I know loans are a popular feature at our company. We have a lot of employees taking loans. But when they make a loan and they have to pay 5% interest, does that interest go back to that employee? Does that accrue back to that employee?
I don't believe so.
The investment company loans them the money,
Okay.
and that is a brokerage company uses that as a profit center.
Yeah.
Is because they get these, they're secured loans, and they're sitting there making a couple of points above what their cost of money is.
I mean, the interest is not deductible, and it wouldn't go back unless it was self-directed account level, which we're not talking about having here, so. Yeah,
So Maura, back to your point, if you're trying to make something as difficult as possible to take those loans, legally, how much can we do?
Well, as plan administrator, I think we can prohibit them if we wanted to. We could just say no. But I think what the committee is saying is in today's world, 95% of plans have some loan feature, and that, I guess it's the committee's judgment that there needs to be some loan provision. So my feedback is, well, if that's what we're going to do, let's sure not make it easy. You know,
And yeah, where they struggle philosophically is saying the employee is taking some risk, we need to give them control, we've secured as much as we can through the defined benefit portion. And that's where they go back, and then they find themselves wanting to control more, and then they go, no, the employee's taking the risk. And so that's really where they go back and forth in the struggle as they're having these discussions.
yeah. We don't have to make it easy.
No.
We don't have to make it easy.
I did make notes. I'll bring options to you. We should be closer to that. We will be closer to the vendor selection, and we'll be able to have discussions around what's our, if we allow them, how many restrictions or what kind of restrictions are we allowed to put on them?
I'm interested in the competitiveness argument, because I can imagine that someone takes a job based on whether they can borrow against their 401k. I mean, is that the competitiveness argument that?
There's no one single determinant, and no, I would not say that is a big decision maker in the process, but we do have an employee who uses it like a savings account. Now, this is their tax deferred investment account. They currently have 16 loans.
And that's a separate account?
That's a separate account, yeah. That would not be the same
That
one.
they've taken out in addition to the DB.
Yep, and that's all their money, yeah. So, but, I mean, it does happen, that's all I'm saying. So they're trying to consider every alternative. But no, you're absolutely right, it is not a major issue for decision
I
making.
think some type of loan provision does encourage participation, perhaps at a higher level, 3% instead of 2%. And I agree with Warren, there needs to be some pretty strong restrictions, but I guess I agree with the committee that there needs to be some kind of loan provisions in the plan.
Okay, I'll take your recommendations back. Automatic rollover, that would be two ways. Do we allow people to roll money in from a previous employer into the plan? And if it is their total savings is below a certain portion, do we require them to roll it out? And those would be discussions that as we get closer to vendor selection, we'll be having, and the committee hasn't made a decision on that yet. They would like to allow in-service withdrawals after age 59 and a half. So in other words, you can start taking your money after age 59 and a half without penalty. They'd like to allow that because they believe people will be working longer, but if they want to ramp down toward retirement, that this is a way that we could allow them to have some retirement, maybe if they don't want to take the defined benefit plan, for example, they could have some retirement, perhaps work less and kind of ramp down toward retirement. So that was what this feature was. And then final distribution options, again, that's further into the process, but they want them to match as closely as we can today to how people are allowed to take their money out of the plan.
What's a reason you wouldn't do an automatic rollover? For somebody coming from another place, a rollover?
Administrative costs. I mean, it's just another administrative burden.
I would think that would be a competitive consideration, for sure.
And some plans do and some plans don't. It's not as high as loans, but yeah. And honestly, some of these are just more detailed, and you need to kind of be having those discussions with the vendor and what they recommend. And so part of this, we're just having to kind of set to the side until we get a vendor. Oh, we did that one? We did that one, okay. So that was the information that I had for you today. The committee's been working hard.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, in the terms of feedback, that worries me. I had not focused on the fact that we were contemplating increasing our contribution, either 15 basis points or, I guess, if this projection's right, up to 45 basis points. So we're looking at locking in over a long term, on average, $1.5 million to $4.5 million a year in additional retirement benefits. To me, in terms of competitiveness, I think we'd be much better served by placing that kind of money in faculty salaries as opposed to increasing our pension benefits. So that's my feedback. And basically try to project out and devise a plan that would allow us to project our contributions to be identical to what they would be under the current plan.
We could model that, couldn't we?
Yes, we certainly can. We'll bring that back.
It would be interesting to see how they would view that. You know, getting it with the salary or
Well,
being,
we've got to make sure the other shoe,
Yes.
we've got to put it in the salary,
Yes.
so, and that's where I think a lot of us feel our number one need right now is enhanced faculty salaries. And in terms of our retirement benefits, I've always thought, and maybe I'm wrong, I've always thought on the scale that we're more competitive with retirement benefits than we have been on faculty salaries. So if we have declining state funding, as we all know, it's probably going to keep declining. We got limited resources. I would spend those on faculty salaries and not increasing our retirement benefits.
Nikki, you want something to say?
Yeah, I did, and the 1% that we talked about was 1% of the total for the plan that has a 7.25% contribution. Remember that it's going to be half that much because we're only it's only a 3.21% of salary, not a 7.25% of salary. So the amount that we are the extra amount is not what were we figuring
15 basis points to 45 basis.
Yeah, it wasn't 1.5 million. It's more like $750,000 first of all, and then the second thing is that these are just projections right now. We haven't. It could be that it's less than this over time, and I would also point out that our normal cost of the DB plan has been going up over time because the normal cost when I first started was more like 7% over time for the DB plan, and it's inched up to 7.25%. So I would just say that, they're both not numbers that are necessarily fixed in time, so I don't think the differences are that great.
I realize all we can do is give our best projection, but I guess my thought would be, let's do our best projection on both ends and try to make them equal. And if we can save money and put them into faculty salaries, that's where I would go.
Great.
The only way you can do what you're talking about, Don, is to reduce the retirement benefit under the plan, because it's all a function of how much you're eventually going to spend and or give to the employees by way of retirement benefits. And the problem with every defined benefit plan is it's a function of how much you're putting in, but also how much you're earning on it in the meantime. Now we've got treasuries, long-term treasuries, bearing interest at 2%. So if we're promising people, in effect, a benefit of 6% of we're basing our amount of money we're going to give an employee on the theory that we're going to earn 6% at least over the time period. And actually, it's probably more like 7.5%. But we, in fact, are only owning 2%, or earning 2%. The shortfall is made up from current contributions out of our budget every year. The more to nail down in stone what you're saying, let's take money away from the future and pay it out currently, would be to convert the whole plan to a strict defined contribution plan where we just say every year we're going to put 7.25% in, and we know our costs for every year. But the problem with that is you can't do that without just scrapping everything this committee's done up to now. So I think what we're looking at here is a compromise. And I think that to do what you're talking about doing, you'd have to go back to all of these assumptions here and say, okay, we're going to reduce the eventual benefit out of the defined benefit plan, or we're going to reduce the contribution we make to the DC plan in order to hit that 7.25%. And I think that's a sea change that would, like I say, would really set us back at least a year in adopting this retirement plan. So
I agree with what you're saying. I think that we can probably, though, illustrate that by modeling what the plan would look like if we matched employer expense to it. In other words, bring the new hybrid plan down to an employer contribution of 7.25%. We'll see what that looks like. But also at the same time, model in the income adequacy chart and see how that falls off, because I think that's Craig's point.
Maybe it was explained and maybe I just didn't get it earlier, but I never contemplated that we would be spending more on a long-term basis by going to this new hybrid, or when we were talking about even just a straight defined contribution, than we project we would spend under our current plan. And if that seems to be, at least based on, and I realize projections are projections, and no one knows what the actual numbers are going to be until we see what the market's going to be 5 years from now. But it seems to me we shouldn't be projecting that it's going to cost us more and have a plan that we project is going to cost us more than our current plan. And I don't know that that was ever explained to the Board of Curators that we were going to be in a higher cost situation than the current plan would put us.
Well, that goes back to what I was saying just a minute ago, that in part you're doing that to offset what it might cost you if you do nothing. Because under the defined benefit plan, the university's going to have to make up the difference when we don't meet the rate of return that the plan depends on. And everything I know indicates that could become a very big number. That's the whole reason we're doing this.
I agree with you, Warren. We're doing this because of volatility issues, and it gives us more certainty. But if over the long term our contribution is higher on average, it's cost us a lot of money over the long term to do this. And I don't think that, at least I never heard that as part of the reasons we were going to this plan. That it's going to cost us $750 to $3 million a year every year for the foreseeable future to do this.
And basically, you're paying in a little more to guarantee that you never have to pay any more than that.
That's right.
And I think, to not do that is comes closer to a fair trade-off with the employees than not doing that. And I don't think we know exactly what we're going to pay till we get it all figured out. But if we end up paying a little more in, it's probably worth it, at least in some people's minds, to make sure you're not paying any more in.
I understand that, and we've got limited resources, and I think we're all trying to grapple with how to deal with limited resources. And I guess my preference would be, as opposed to putting more resources on the retirement side, put them on the faculty salary side. But I realize, and Craig, and you raised a good point, it gets very, very complicated on how to do that. So that's just we were asking for feedback. That's sort of my observation. Mm-hmm. If it can't be done realistically, obviously we need to do what we can do.
I think Craig's point is right, and I would share your objective there. The only way you can do that is to just go to a complete defined contribution plan, lock in what your contribution is, and the savings put into salaries. I don't think anybody's ready to go there. If you keep with the DB plan, you can't do that because your required contribution floats. You don't know what it is. The only way you can divert the money that you're talking about diverting to salaries, which is a noble cause, is if you go to a DC, then by God, that's it, and it ain't one penny more, then you can do it.
And I'm not for that.
Yeah, I don't think anybody is for that, so,
right.
But it's an interesting concept.
But we're shifting risk from the university to the employee, and they ought to be paid a little more to take on that risk. And, that's kind of what the whole debate has been all along on this.
I agree with you. They ought to be paid more, and I guess my thought would be they ought to be paid more on salaries.
Yeah, it's a shifting of, it's still going the same direction to the employees, but we're deferring it, but they get some tax benefits as a result of the deferral, so.
It gets complicated.
Nikki, you lost me when you said it's only half of that amount. When Don said it was between 15 and 45 basis points, and you said no, it's not.
Well, the 15 is correct, but it's not. The base is wrong. That we were multiplying the 15% times. So we were looking at what the cost is currently for our 7.25% plan for a 1% increase in the required contribution. In this particular case, the the amount, well, first of all, early on, the amount of the base won't be as big, but over the long haul, it won't cost us $10 million in order for 1% increase, because it's not a 7% required contribution.
3.21.
Okay, you're
it's
saying,
only half
but you're
that.
saying under the new plan,
under the new
it's
plan.
where
That's right.
1% is half of that.
It's half of that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Half of 10 million.
Kelly, at what point do we think we will have 50% of our employees in the DB versus the hybrid? How many years
It's
out?
been a while since I looked at those projections, but I thought it was, took 17 years before we made that shift.
So the numbers that you showed on the bottom line in terms of an employer contribution, the ones that showed a slight difference, we're not going to see that until 17 years out.
Yeah, it's
And
over
up
a long
until
period of
17
time.
years from now, that column on the left-hand side, the hybrid side, would be actually, while the percentage would be the same, the cost would be much less to the university.
The other challenge I think that the committee struggled with is when you're talking about $700,000 a year or whatever, the granularity of that compared to a $2.7 billion plan, I mean, it becomes, and so if you were to take your contribution assumptions and you lowered one of those brackets by 1%, your cost estimate of the plan would be probably right in line with where you'd like to see it. And so it's you have to tweak just a little bit to do it. And we won't know until after a year or two experience what our employees' behaviors are going to be around contribution. And so and I will tell you that the committee was very conservative, and they estimated contributions on the high side because they did want to be, conservative. They didn't want to estimate and propose a plan that then would come in more expensive. They were concerned about that. So I do think they were conservative, but that's where they're really challenged because they can't predict behavior.
I think one thing we got to keep in mind too, though, is that we have over half of our employees get nothing now for the retirement because they either quit before 5 years or some other reason. Under this plan, I would hope it mostly affects the lower paid employees. Is that right? So hopefully under this plan, we would get more of our employees have something for their retirement, especially the lower paid employees. Is that going to be the result of this change?
Well, it depends on if they cash out that money and use it, or if they leave it for retirement. So that's...
At least there's a chance they could
certainly there is a
save more
chance.
for retirement than they are now.
There's a chance.
Especially for our lower paid employees.
The auto enrollment at 3% is in the plan as of now, right?
That's proposed, correct. That's what the committee's recommending to you.
I think that's a good idea. I don't think they miss it all that much get-go, and once they get used to it, they leave it there. So
That was the committee's feeling.
I think that's
Good.
that's a big change.
Strictly for lower. Right. Other questions?
Just
Because it
another
hasn't
comment
grown.
that I would have, and that is, from everything I read, the people that are going to be our professors and our faculty, they're changing what they want as far as how much they want to work. I don't know how much that's going to affect it, but you got the people that they want it all. They want to be parents, they want to teach, they don't want their whole life to just be, as we have observed some of our longtime professors, that's their life. They want to do all sorts of different things. So in my mind, I'm thinking too, how is that going to change some of those numbers by how much people are working? Adjunct faculty, we know we got more of that. We got a lot of different things going on with the professors that we're using.
That's right.
One piece of feedback that I would give to you is when we next talk about this, I understand you're going to focus on the investment choices that the employee can make, and I'm really interested in that. I think that can become too complex, and then they just glaze over. I want a lot of thought to go in to life cycle or age-appropriate steering. Granted, they control it, their decision, it should be. But I want to understand how we're going to steer people or educate them to get into an age-appropriate mix and make sure the mix isn't too complicated. Most of the participants in this are not going to be people who even understand the difference between basic things here. So we can't overdo this too much. We need to keep it kind of simple.
I totally agree with you, Warren, and I don't know if it would be possible or feasible to make a default position for the investment mix, these age-appropriate investments.
It is. If the employer, or that's the recommendation to you, if the employee makes no choice, it will default to the life cycle fund.
Good.
Right.
And there will be a sizable number of people who don't make a choice, especially since we're auto-enrolling them.
Yeah.
Okay? Anybody else have questions?
I've got one more little bit
Craig?
here. On the beneficiary designations, there's default beneficiary designations. When you set up the plan so that in the event of death, there's automatic beneficiary designation.
Generally, the way we currently have it, and again, we haven't gotten to this level of detail, if they don't designate, it goes to the estate.
Okay, well.
For us lawyers.
Is there
Yeah.
something you'd like for us
Well,
to consider?
I think there ought to be, that's exactly what I'm thinking. Since half of marriages end in divorce, I want to make sure that the beneficiary designation aspect of it specifies that a divorce terminates a designation to a previous spouse. In other words, somebody fills out a beneficiary designation that says, I name my spouse, then they get divorced. Current law is that beneficiary designation stays until you make a new one. And that generates a bunch of litigation. I just assume have
It
that
defaults.
included. It defaults back to if you're divorced, it cancels the beneficiary designation.
Okay, okay.
Okay? Any other thoughts? I think that concludes our update. We'll
Thank
get
you.
another update, I guess, on October 4th.
Correct.
Okay?
Well, thank you for that good dialogue, and hopefully that's helpful to the committee and some important feedback that will shape the final recommendation. With that, we're going to, I think, close the Comp Committee and open the Finance Committee meeting. Chairman Downing.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.